And one story I was particularly interested in today was PGA officials in front of lawmakers on Capitol Hill to discuss the agreed upon merger, but not necessarily signed merger with LIV Golf, of course, the Saudi-backed LIV Golf League. And the exchanges today were quite interesting. I want to highlight one exchange to sort of kick off what the discussion was like today, guys. This was between PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer Ron Price and Senator Richard Blumenthal. Let's take a listen to what they had to say today.
We were in a situation of where we faced a real threat of...
But you could go elsewhere for $1 billion, $3 billion, maybe $50 billion, correct?
We could, but if we went down that path, we would end up giving up total control. But we would still face the threat of a $700 billion fund recruiting our players and operating a league in an irrational economic manner.
So again, that was Ron Price, the PGA Tour COO, filling in for Jay Monahan, who is still out on leave right now. But he was sort of laying out the case there of why they took or sort of sought out a merger with LIV and Saudi in the public investment fund instead of taking maybe private equity money, right? We know private equity has been increasingly interested in sports. And I thought it was interesting when he highlighted the amount of money the PIF has and essentially said, even if we got private equity money, if we got traditional U.S. funding, we still probably couldn't hang with the PIF and the amount of money they were spending on these contracts. Remember, rumored they offered Tiger Woods $700 million. Like, are you going to get private equity in the U.S. to be able to compete with that? And he coming out today and essentially saying, Pras, no way, right?
I mean, a lot going on here with a lot of testimony and documents submitted to the subcommittee. Like you're talking about, I think there was a letter between an intermediary of the PIF and Dunn, one of the members of the PGA Advisory Board, talking about how the Saudis were going to spend upwards of $5 billion to compete to try to take out the PGA, and that there was no way they could survive beyond that infinite kind of money chest, right? So I could see why the financial pressure was there on the PGA, but also hearing about how Rory McIlroy took meetings with PIF, with one of the people from PIF like earlier, and he's talking about how he had no idea this is happening, this deal was going on. He knew it was going down, right? So I guess there's a lot of like machinations behind the scenes there. What are we going to do with kind of like that's all interesting, but I think the two big parts that I think I was concerned about was the antitrust component and also the sports washing component, which I think is kind of a big deal that a lot of people were critical about.
And the antitrust part really wasn't covered that much.
That's what I was surprised about.
A couple senators talked about it briefly, but it really wasn't addressed that much. Now, the DOJ is also investigating that, so I think there'll be a separate hearing on that specific issue. But it really was not. It was not delved into that deeply, I didn't think.
No, and I was most surprised about that. I mean, to me, this entire hearing comes down to that soundbite that we heard. It comes down to the money. Money talks at the end of the day. And I do believe that the PGA probably wouldn't be able to continue to exist if they were always competing against LIV Golf, because that's what the money's behind them at the end of the day.
Well, Pras mentioned that potential $5 billion number, right? And it was interesting. A couple numbers came out through this process. The senators were doing a good job of asking questions about specific numbers. One that stuck out was that the PIF, the discussions have been for, quote, north of $1 billion to be invested in this new golf entity. Now, the PGA Tour, Price said, does about $2.1 billion in revenue. That's the expected revenue for this year. So about half of what they do in revenue coming into this new number. And then again, when you talk about the PGA Tour talking about their whole asset value today, Price said about $3 billion. So you're talking about $3 billion, and LIV maybe was ready to put in $5 billion.
Wow.
Like, it's just, there's no chance with the numbers these guys are playing with. And I think it's interesting also to highlight when we talk about this being golf and how different the scenario is than other sports. I think the PGA was in a very rare scenario here because they try and operate as a nonprofit. They're not funded by billionaires like some of these other sports leagues where you can get more money, get more funding easily and quickly. And so I think the PGA Tour got caught up pretty well. It was a nice play by the public investment fund to go after golf specifically if they wanted to get into American sports.
Right, because you can't really buy 30 NFL teams. Even the Saudis couldn't do that, right? I also thought it was pretty funny. I'm always harping on the funny parts about it, where when once the PGA sort of got involved with PIF and talking about how this would work, talking about how they wanted to whack Greg Norman. I mean, all these are like, oh, but now what if we install our own guys in charge of this, and which they're going to do, right? But it's just funny how quickly they got, and not quickly, but how they were able to get, yeah, we're going to take that money. I think we're okay with that. We're okay with that.
I think, Ali, the biggest takeaway here, too, and I know you've covered, or another takeaway that you've covered as well, is the media aspect of this. And when you really think about what was happening at this hearing, I feel like a lot of just political posturing about talking about the money coming from Saudi Arabia, people, quote, being uncomfortable with it, people not wanting it, it's sports washing, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the money's still going to happen. So I don't know how that relates to what you've covered in terms of media deals, if there's still going to be a media deal, and maybe at the end of the day, in 5 years, people just kind of don't care where the money comes from, and you can still get media deals. That seems like
that's
sort
a pessimistic view, but it does make sense, because if you have something pulling in that money, like I said before, money is the thing that ends up talking. I do wonder, in terms of advertising, how that could potentially play into things. If this merger is completed, if it goes through, could certain companies pull out, not want to advertise for these tours? I'm not sure what the ripple effect is there.
I mean, I would say that golf has been a very friendly sport to sponsors, and people want to get their badging on
and it's a higher-end consumer, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot
financial services,
Yes.
Lexus, car companies. Quickly on the antitrust stuff, right? Just quickly. So the NFL is the only. Baseball is the only sport with an exemption, an antitrust exemption. They actually have that 100 years ago, like Oliver Wendell Holmes, Supreme Court justice made this ruling, right? But because of the fact that we're having this, I mean, there's no other major competitors in the pro golf game, right? The NFL has like what, USFL or whatever that thing was, XFL. There's nothing in golf, so it makes me think maybe there is an angle there for. FTC just lost a big case today with Microsoft, Microsoft and Activision. Are they going to come after golf? I mean, I think maybe they might do that.
And then could they come after other sports then too, right? Because you look around and there's...
Well, it sets a precedent.
Well, they've always thought about attacking baseball's antitrust exemption, because why do they get that and the NFL doesn't, NHL doesn't, whatever else? So there's always that angle of the political and the kind of executive branch sort of thinking about what's going on here with sports. And then you're talking about nonprofit. I mean, really? I mean, a lot of questions there.
Always people making money in those nonprofits.
Right.